Welcome to worship on this Maundy Thursday. I'm Deb Conrad, pastor of Woodside, and gathering with you as we walk together through Holy Week. Maundy means mandate in Latin. This is the night we commemorate Jesus' last meal with his friends. His command that we do this to remember him, which we do every week when we gather. Tonight, though, we are deviating just a little. On Sunday, we read the beginning of the story of the last week of Jesus' life, a story this time filtered through the imagination of Walter Wangerin, who wrote the entire Bible as a novel called the Book of God. Sunday, we left off with Jesus' arrest and abandonment by his friends. Tonight, we will pick up there and take you through his execution and burial. This is not exactly scripture. It is storytelling, which is a faith exercise. You may hear things that don't seem quite right or even that annoy you. I hope you will also hear things that pique your curiosity or give you a greater sense of the humanness of the experience. Jesus and his friends felt things: fear, pain, guilt, grief, anger. So as you hear the story, allow yourself to hear the humanity of it all and recognize in the course of things that we 21st century people are actually no less barbaric than our first century ancestors. But we will hear more about that tomorrow night, Good Friday, when we revisit Jesus' crucifixion and hear again the stories of modern day crucifixions, of lynchings. I hope you'll join us then as well. Tonight, allow yourself to enter into this story. Allow yourself to walk with Jesus. And in the walking, allow yourself to imagine the kind of disciples that we are called to be and the grace of God that carries us through our days. Whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome at Woodside Church. Let's pray. God of grace and glory, you are present in the most difficult times of our lives, and we give you thanks. Tonight, remind us of your love in the midst of our dysfunctional and wounded humanity. Give us glimpses of what might be possible and pour your Spirit on us to make it so. Let us love what you love and hope as you hope. Amen. Amen.
In the garden Thursday night, Judas had betrayed and the authorities had come with swords to arrest Jesus. The disciples scattered and Jesus was hauled away.
John, it was a hoarse and guttural whisper, unrecognizable. John, is that you? John had been hurrying through the narrow streets of the lower city. He froze and flattened himself to a wall. The night was impenetrable. John, son of Zebedee, where are you? The young man almost crouched down in order to hide. Instead, he surprised himself by calling out, "Who's that? Who's there?" The whispering stopped. Except for a distant clatter of running feet, the city was still as stone. John suffered a moment of panic, then a hand grabbed his shoulder. He whirled and delivered a blow to the side of someone's head. It cracked his knuckles and he yelped. The voice said, "Relax, it's me." "Simon." "Simon," John snapped. "What's the matter with you?" "Sorry," said Simon. "Sorry. Where are you going?" John, rubbing his hand, began to walk at a quick pace. Simon followed. "I know you've got some sort of plan," he said. John bent his elbows and started to trot. Simon, puffing harder, ran too. "First, you went toward Bethany like the rest," Simon said. "But then you stopped. I saw you. You turned around and came back to the city. I followed you. You knocked on someone's door. Who was that? I saw him rush out ahead of you, throwing on his robes as he went. You're going after him now, right?" "Yes, Simon. And if I don't get there when he does, I miss my chance. You've already taken more time than I could spare." John broke into a steady running. "Get where?" Simon called. "What chance?" The bigger man was having trouble keeping up. "To me, to be with him." "Him? Who?" "Jesus. To be with Jesus." "Jesus? Where?" "The high priest's palace." "Jesus?" Simon exclaimed. "That's exactly what I thought." But John said nothing now. He was running swiftly up the ancient steps to the Mount Zion. Simon, gasping for air, fell farther and farther back. And on the heights of Zion, other people were hurrying through the dark streets too, all converging northeast of the Essene quarter. John tempered his speed to match theirs. He didn't want to attract attention. These people were members of the Sanhedrin, summoned suddenly by Caiaphas to his palace. John knew of the meeting. It was a trial. Joseph of Arimathea had told him. He turned a corner and ran along a low wall, then stopped at the gate of the high priest's courtyard. It was shut, but there, just inside, was Joseph himself, peering anxiously into the night. As soon as he recognized John, he spoke to the maid who was keeping the gate, gestured toward John, then dashed through the courtyard to stairs that led to an upper chamber. The maid came and opened the gate to John. There's too much light in here. Officers were standing by a central fire, warming themselves. Lanterns were attached to the walls roundabout. John felt uncomfortable. He bowed his head and began to walk toward the stairs when a voice boomed, John, John, here, out here. Simon, lathered and breathless, was standing in the gate. Quickly, John went to the maid who had admitted him and smiled. That man is also a friend of the high priest, he said. The maid glanced back and forth between the two men, suspicious. Finally, she went and opened the gate. If Simon came in, he was on his own.
John was already mounting the steps to the chamber, whose windows glowed with an interior light. Voices grew louder the closer he came, the general murmuring of many men. John did not try to enter. He crept along a stone walkway that circled the outside of the room till he was hidden from the courtyard below. Then he brought his face close to the window grill and looked inside. Men's heads blocked his vision. They were standing with their backs to the wall, but they nodded and muttered and craned to see. So John caught glimpses of the proceedings within. Jesus, a head moved, and John saw Jesus. His heart leaped. There stood Jesus, solitary in the center of the room, as calm as a candle, though his clothes and his flesh were soiled. And the hair that hung down his back was a falling mass of knots. A voice inside said, testimony. Heads moved, all looking in one direction and blocking John's view. Testimony, said the voice, dominant and self-confident. A lesser voice, farther inside the room, called out, he spat in my son's face. The head swerved to the new speaker, and John could see Jesus again, profile facing the front of the room, which was cut from view by the window encasement. His arms were still bound behind him, but he seemed motionless by choice. His lips pursed as if forming one letter of the alphabet, one sound forever. Spat in your son's face, said the voice of silken authority. And Jesus was hidden again. What sort of charge is that? Uncleanness, bodily discharge. The spit defiled my boy. Someone else called, no, it healed your son's blindness. It got him thrown out of the synagogue too. Not enough, declared the voice in the front of the room. This must be the high priest, Caiaphas. I want more damning testimony. There was a menace in his tone. Then people began to shout out a series of accusations. He has broken every Sabbath law, working, walking, cooking on the Sabbath. Noted, said the high priest. He eats with sinners. Noted. He scorns our father Abraham. He casts out demons by the power of demons. He says he can forgive sins. Noted, noted. The high priest raised his voice in procedural scorn. We've heard it all before, and none of it warrants execution. The room was stunned to silence.
Directly in front of John bowed down, and he saw Jesus framed by the window, still erect, his beautiful forehead filled with thought. Who brings against the defendant? Caiaphas said with smooth articulation. Witness concerning a capital crime, an offense deserving death. Suddenly, the head at the window snapped up, and inches from John's face called, I do. John swallowed hard. The nearness left him trembling. The man moved from the window into the room and stood by Jesus. Give God the praise, the invisible judge intoned. What have you to say? Rubbing his chin, the witness said, I heard the defendant announce that he was going to destroy the temple. Good sir, sabotage and sacrilege are killing offenses. Very good. Yes, cried another man, rushing to the side of the first. Yes, he said he destroyed the temple made with hands and in 3 days built another without hands. Wait, said Caiaphas, but already a third man was clapping for attention and shouting, I heard it too, just this week. No, 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 the first man shouted. No, the defendant said it 3 years ago exactly. Shut up, the voice of the high priest dominated the room. Trifling witnesses, you're ruining your own testimony. The 3 men crept to the farther wall, and Jesus remained alone in the center of the room. Then Caiaphas himself appeared. John saw the high priest approaching Jesus, a wizened, insinuating man, hunched at the shoulders, moving on soundless tread. Over clean white linen, he wore a blue woven robe whose hem was edged with bells of gold and pomegranates of cloth. On his head, he wore a grand turban. Caiaphas found a mark immediately before the slender form of the Lord and stepped on it. Then he lifted his face and parted his lips in smiling. Jesus returned the look, but did not smile. Caiaphas said, What? Have you nothing to say in answer to these charges? You've never been afraid to speak. Go ahead. Caiaphas made a show of bowing his head to listen. Defend yourself. But Jesus held his peace. John's heart was hammering within him, seeing these two in such proximity. Jesus had a lean, regal posture, but he was filthy, and Caiaphas was arrayed in the glory of Aaron. You do not choose to talk, said Caiaphas. Then I choose, and you shall have no choice but to speak. The high priest drew himself up to his full height and said, I adjure you by the living God to tell us whether you are Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. Softly, Jesus said, I am. John gasped and covered his mouth. Jesus was still speaking, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. The man is dangerous, Caiaphas muttered. Then he said, Blasphemy! More loudly still, Blasphemy! He seized the throat of his robe and tore the cloth apart. What need do we have of witnesses when the man blasphemes in the very midst of the council? Caiaphas withdrew from Jesus, out of John's sight, but his insinuating voice filled the chamber. What say you, reverend sirs? What sentence does the Nazarene deserve? Death. First one and then another. Death. Then the whole company of witnesses and counselors were condemning Jesus in a glad chorus of unity. Death. It was as if some prohibition had snapped in the room. Men surged in towards Jesus. John wound his fingers through the window grill, tormented by the scene. Men were spitting in Jesus' face and hitting him in the head. They covered his eyes and cried, Prophecy, Christ! Who was that hit you? John backed away from the window. Sick with sorrow, he turned away. Just then he heard footsteps in the narrow road behind the priest's house. A man was running. John looked and in the spill of the window light recognized the small form of Judas Iscariot, dashing away at a wild pace. It was the last time any disciple saw Judas.
This is how Simon Peter remembered it later.
John left me alone. He disappeared. I had no idea where he went, and I had no friend in that place. He did, I didn't. And even as the servant was opening the gate, she kept staring into my face. That was unnerving enough. Then she spoke, and I glanced down at her. That's how I lost sight of John in the courtyard. What she said was, "Aren't you one of that man's disciples?" Took my breath away. I just had gotten there. "What man?" I said. "You know," she said, "the man they arrested." "No," I said, "no, I'm not." I brushed past her, and since John was nowhere in sight, I went to the fire in the middle of the courtyard as if I had business in that place and knew exactly where I was going. It was a common fire on a cold night. Officers of the temple guard were warming themselves, servants too. I put out my hands, ducked my head down. Jesus was somewhere in that palace. I meant to stay, but that maid wouldn't leave me alone. Soon I felt that people were looking at me, made my flesh crawl. Glanced up, and there she was, talking to the officers. "This is one of them," she said. "He's a disciple of the Nazarene." "Woman," I said, "I don't know him, and I do not understand what you're talking about." But I moved to the forecourt, a colder place, but darker too. I loved Jesus. I loved Jesus then, desperately. The whole night it was hard for me to even breathe because I kept seeing him tied up. He was somewhere in the high priest's house with people who wanted to kill him. How could I leave? I kept wringing my hands, helpless. I wanted to throw my body at the doors and beat them all with clubs. I don't know how long I paced in that dark place. An hour, maybe? But then, I'll tell this part as truthfully as I can. Then 4 things happened, one right after the other. First, the shouting. All at once, they came from an upper chamber, the slurred shouts of many men. They were laughing as if they were drunk. I went back into the courtyard to see what was happening, but a soldier blocked my way and said, "You are one of them." I said, "No." He said, "Don't lie to me. You're a Galilean." I said, "No," and tried to push him back. But he struck my chest and said, "Don't you recognize me?" He struck me again. "I was there when you cut off my cousin's ear." "Damn you," I yelled, "damn you." People started to look, people in the courtyard, people pouring out of the upper chamber. 2 guards reached for their weapons. It drove me crazy. I raised my right hand and screamed, "I swear by the city of Jerusalem that I know nothing of the man. I do not know." Then this is the third thing that happened. Jesus came out of the upper chamber, his arms bound behind him. He turned and looked down at me. He saw my right hand in the air. And this is the fourth thing. Somewhere in the night, a rooster started to crow. I lowered my hand, covered my mouth, turned away from Jesus, and ran out of the courtyard. I ran out into the city. I ran down a dark alley and fell to the ground with my face in my hands, and I burst into tears. I cried and I cried, and I could not stop. This is the whole truth.
Friday's dawning was uncertain. It was the end of the latter rains. Clouds had crept in from the sea and covered Jerusalem in a sky as undefined as the sea itself, a gray weight under heaven. Dawn, then, was a lessening of shadow, an odor of moisture, and a dirty light. Now and again, a thin, drizzling rain fell. The palace which Herod the Great had built more than 50 years ago was enclosed by a wall of massive stone, 45 feet high. Pontius Pilate walked its promenades. His troops occupied its barracks. Rome ruled. A principal gate in the Praetorium wall opened eastward to the wide public square of the upper city. Guards stood in towers on either side of the gate, though in those days they did not shut the huge doors. Jews who intended to celebrate the Passover would never defile themselves by entering the residence of a Gentile. But Roman law required prosecutions and sentencing to take place in public. In order to render legal judgments, then, Pilate met with the people of Judea in that square east of the royal palace. A dais had been erected in that place. When court was in session, a large wooden chair was brought out and set upon this platform, the magistrate's seat. When Pontius Pilate sat therein, he was Rome. In the dirty dawn of Friday, High Priest Caiaphas stood at the very edge of the ramp that led to the Praetorium gate and rapped the hard end of his staff on the flagstones. An audience and a judgment, he called. Behind him, a miserable group had gathered in the public square. Soldiers of the temple guard, certain leading members of the Sanhedrin, and in their midst, his wrists bound in front of him, his face soiled and tired, but otherwise unremarkable, Jesus of Nazareth. Pontius Pilate, procurator, the high priest called, clearly but loudly, not obsequiously. Here is a criminal of such public threat that Rome must hear the indictment and pass sentence and execute her sentence now, today, before sunset and the Sabbath. Having made his formal petition, the high priest returned to those who stood under the gray drizzle in the open square. Other members of the Sanhedrin showed more anxiety than he did, murmuring among themselves about the charges they would bring. Jesus allowed his eye to wander over the spacious pavement. He focused on the far southeastern corner. His lips tightened and his jaw clenched. Several women and a man were lurking in that corner, their hoods drawn up against the weather. Their faces were mostly concealed, but he recognized them. Andrew, his first follower. He must have brought the women here. Mary Magdalene, pinched and pale, Joanna and Susanna and Mary of Bethany, and her sister Martha, short and solid. Jesus closed his eyes with unutterable sadness. Suddenly, 2 Roman soldiers thrust a wooden shaft between his elbows and his back. They each took an end and drove him forward to the front steps of the platform. Pilate's chair was in position. Pontius Pilate himself was ascending the steps at the back of the platform. The judge and the accused arrived at the same time.
A servant raised a shield over Pilate's chair to protect him from the rain. Now then, said Pilate, sitting down and beckoning the high priest forward, what's the charge? The Roman wore his hair cut short, his knuckles were dimpled, his fingers fat, his upper lip low in the middle of the high at the sides, as if it were deformed by too much blowing of trumpets. It gave him an expression of perpetual sneering. Caiaphas said, we found this man, Jesus of Nazareth, perverting our nation. Yes, said Pilate, and, said Caiaphas, sedition. He says that he is a Messiah, a king. Pilate frowned. Why have you come to me? He said. Your Messiah is your religion. Judge him according to your own law. The governor made motions to stand and go. Caiaphas snapped to attention. No, we must come to you, he said. We don't have the authority to put a man to death. Pilate did stand up then. Death? He said. You think he's committed a capital offense? He stepped forward and squinted into Jesus' face, then said, bring him in. I'll interrogate him inside. By the rod at his back, the soldiers dragged Jesus after the governor. through the gate into the praetorium itself. In a broad hallway, Pilate again sat down. Jesus was positioned directly in front of him. There was a bowl of fruit at Pilate's left hand. I have no time for this, he said. Make your answer short. Jesus of Nazareth, are you the King of the Jews? Jesus, bent forward by the rod through the crooks of his elbows, nevertheless raised his head and looked into Pilate's eyes. Do you say this on your own, he said, or did others tell you this about me? What? Am I a Jew? Pilate sneered. Your own chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my subjects would be fighting for me, but my kingdom does not belong here at all. So, said Pilate, and you are a king. You say I am a king, said Jesus. The reason I was born into the world is to testify to the truth. All those who belong to the truth listen to my voice. Truth, said Pilate abruptly, half out of his chair. What is truth? Shaking his head, he walked out into the wet morning, while the accused was driven stumbling behind him. This time Jesus was forced to climb the steps to the dais. As he came to the top, he saw Pilate's back and heard his confident announcement. I find no fault in this man.
A clamor arose in the public square. Crowds were gathering now. Certain members of the Sanhedrin came forward, lodging further charges against Jesus. He stirs the people to insurrection, even from Galilee to this place. Pilate glanced toward Jesus, permission to respond. Jesus said nothing. He's a known revolutionary. Pilate nodded, but Jesus said nothing. He has forbidden his followers to give tribute to Caesar. Each time an accusation was presented, Pilate invited some reply from Jesus, but he held his peace. He pursed his lips. He looked every accuser squarely in the face, but he himself said nothing. Finally, Pilate raised his hand for silence. He stepped forward on the platform, prepared to render his ruling. I examined this man and found no evidence for any of your charges, he said. But your outrage is real and it must be satisfied. Therefore, I will order the accused to be scourged with a whip of knotted cords and weights of metal, the flagellum. After that, I propose to honor your custom of releasing one prisoner at the Passover. I will release this man, Jesus of Nazareth. There was a moment of perfect stillness. The high priest looked trapped, unable to respond. Suddenly, a voice cried from the back of the crowd, Jesus? Jesus who? It was a woman, perhaps 50 years old. She began to push her way forward, crying, Jesus of Nazareth? Not Jesus of Nazareth. She was clothed modestly, like a rabbi's wife. Though her robes were drenched and her progress was broken by the weight. Jesus watched her coming. So did Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas the high priest. The woman's features were hectic with fear and a wild hoping. No, she was calling, not Jesus of Nazareth, but Jesus Barabbas, my son, set my son free. Jesus recognized the rage of maternal love in this woman, and he admired her. Caiaphas seemed to catch fire as she came nearer. He reached for her, took her elbow, escorted her to the very lip of the platform, and trembling with compassion, cried to Pilate, yes, this woman's son. If you choose to honor the custom, sir, release unto us Jesus Barabbas. A handful of zealots clapped their hands and yelled, "Barabbas, Barabbas." The governor was stunned. "The man is a murderer," he said. "You yourself asked for his arrest, and I agreed." Caiaphas said, "I know which is more dangerous to both of us." Pilate snapped, "Only one of them has killed a Roman." But Caiaphas and the chief priests were already encouraging the crowds, common folk and common loyalties, who drowned Pilate's words with their chanting, "Barabbas, release unto us Barabbas." This grew to a thunder in the square. People came rushing from everywhere in the city. More and more voices took up the chanting. The crowd was swelling into a mob. "Barabbas, Barabbas." Only one on the dais could hear the governor's issue orders to a centurion. "Take him to the barracks, whip him, and make a bloody man."
Four soldiers grabbed Jesus and dragged him through the Praetorium gate. There was no care in their going. Haste, brutality. The multitude was achieving that swollen, rocking rhythm which every Roman feared because riot was at the heart of it. Make it bloody, man. In the barracks, soldiers stripped the clothes from Jesus' body. His hands were tied to a post with thongs. Out of nowhere, a lash whistled, stung his shoulders with little pinchings, then rippled backward and set his flesh on fire. Again, the whistle and the lash, and the nettle stings. Again, an audible tearing of his skin. And then he heard someone crying out in sympathy. The whistle. And Jesus couldn't help it. He flinched. The whistle. He drew one knee up to his stomach. The whistle. And Jesus realized who was crying out. The whistle. It was himself. The whistle. The whistle. Jesus begged to taste blood in his breathing, in his mouth. Jesus began to taste blood in his breathing, in his mouth and nose. He stopped making noises. Darkness closed around the edges of his thoughts. The whistle. He sagged. He hung heavy from his wrists. The whistle. As though from far away, Jesus watched several soldiers place on a man's brow a circlet of thorny briars. Next, they threw over his back a billowing purple robe, as huge as the sky. Hail, King of the Jews! Ha ha! Hail, robed in blood, thou bloody king! But then Jesus himself was on his feet, walking. Under rough fibers, his skin was sticky and wet. A thick liquid was running down his legs. The soles of his feet kept slipping in it. His back was unbendable. Jesus knew that it would hurt soon. Then he was standing on one side of the dais, confronting the multitude. Pontius Pilate was gesturing toward him and shouting, "Behold the man!" On the other side of the dais now stood another man, athletic, dark-eyed, fiery and clean. How neatly combed he was. Jesus strove to stand erect, but failed. His robe was woven of iron and stone. Pilate shouted, "Now what do you say? Which man should I release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus of Nazareth?" The multitude had found a single voice. "Barabbas," it bellowed. Pontius looked troubled. "And what shall I do with this man?" he cried. "Crucify him!" came the thick-throated chorus, priests and people and zealots and pilgrims, but no distinction among them. They were mindless mob. "Crucify him!" Jesus lifted his eyes and looked to the southeast corner of the square, where he had seen some of his followers in the dirty dawning. Suddenly he gasped and nearly collapsed. "Why should I crucify him?" Pilate was crying. "What evil has he done?" Caiaphas leaped to the platform and shouted at the top of his lungs, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." Jesus had spied his mother. She was clinging to John. Woman of no means, woman who had borne him, woman whose clothing was dark with the morning rain. She was staring at him with horror, her mouth wide open. Pilate was shouting at Jesus, "What's the matter with you, man? Have you nothing to say?" Caiaphas too was shouting, "Crucify him, magistrate, or else you are no friend of Caesar's, because he pretends to be a king like Caesar." "Crucify him!" The huge crush of people was wheeling toward riot. "Crucify him!" "What then?" shrieked Pontius Pilate. "Shall I crucify your king?" The high priest turned purple with fury. "We have no king but Caesar." And the voice of the multitude resolved itself in an endless, ponderous roaring, "Crucify!" So Pilate sank down into the judgment chair and gripped the armrest and delivered his verdict. He released the man that had been arrested for insurrection and for murder. But Jesus of Nazareth, he returned over to the will of the people. He ordered a centurion and a small contingent of soldiers to lead him outside the city and to crucify him.
Jesus is dragging a heavy wooden beam up the center of the street. In fact, 2 soldiers tried to lay it on his shoulders, but the weight of the rough wood startled the lacerations in his back, and the pain became so intense that something like a light exploded in Jesus' skull, and he slipped to the ground in a faint. So now he is cradling one end of the beam under his left arm and bumping the other end over the stones of the street. Each stone is a Sinai. There are spike holes near the extremities of the beam. It has been used before. Jesus is moving north slowly toward the garden gate. He is wearing his own robe again and his tunic, though they have lost their shape, scabrous, befouled by human discharge. His hair, because he bends so far forward, hangs nearly to the ground. The sandaled feet of a centurion are walking in front of him, just within his vision. He is following those feet. There's the sound of wailing behind him. He has heard such lamentations before, sometimes genuine, sometimes conventional. For Lazarus, for Jairus' daughter, for the son of the widow Nain. The beam sticks between 2 stones. Jesus groans and drops to his knees, and the lumber hits the ground. He doesn't blame the crossbeam to which he will be nailed. He just can't carry it anymore. Motion makes his skin scream, and beneath all his bones are weak and tired. Someone is parting his hair and drawing it back from his forehead. He's able to see. An elderly woman, her eyes swimming in tears, wipes his brow with a rich linen cloth, then presses it into his hand. And the centurion seems kindly enough, middle-aged, gruff. He has spoken to the soldiers, who even now are placing the wooden beams on the back of another man. Jesus is overcome with gratitude. His chest heaves with weeping. He rises and finds his body very light. He walks forward. Immediately, the procession lifts its voice again in lamentation.
The morning drizzle has turned to rain. Everyone is wet. And the sky is more than merely gray now. Darker clouds are rolling in from the west. There is a breeze. It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Friday. Out through the garden gate they go, and yet farther north. The stone city wall runs north and south on his right-hand side. Jewish tombs are cut into the rock on his left. Here is a hillock by the side of the road, a rocky mound in which 4 stout poles are fixed, forever ready to receive the crossbeams and the bodies of criminals sentenced to crucifixion. The hill allows a public viewing. It is called Golgotha. The centurion halts here and hands Jesus a jar of liquid. He lifts it to his lips and tastes it. It is wine mixed with myrrh, a narcotic. He refuses to drink it. 4 soldiers strip Jesus down to his loincloth. At the same time, another group of soldiers arrives. They bring 2 more men with crossbeams on their backs. These men do drink. They drain their jars completely dry. All 3 now are stretched on the ground, each beside a different pole. Jesus stares at the black clouds lowering. His back is a field of fire. He cannot swallow. He wishes he could swallow, but his tongue is thick and stuck to the roof of his mouth. Someone lifts his head by the hair, then pillows it on the wood. His arms are yanked left and right as far as they will go, palms up. The cold point touches his wrist. Jesus hears the thump of a maul on metal, once, twice. He feels a spike probing the bones in his right arm. Once, twice, 3 times. As the bones separate and the spike bites hard wood, a dull pain pulses up into his armpit and his neck. His left arm, likewise, is nailed to the crossbeam. Then, by pikes and human strength, Jesus is lifted bodily from the ground. Soldiers climb ladders behind the stout pole, hauling him up and allowing him to swing from his arms alone until the beam is lashed to the pole and the cross is formed. The soldiers descend. In front of him, they bend his knees and drive a 3rd spike through his ankles. His muscles convulse. He begins to tremble as if he were very cold. His teeth chatter. He bites his tongue but doesn't notice, except there is a taste of blood in his mouth. Abba. Jesus speaks through bloody foam and through shivering, even while one of the Roman soldiers climbs the pole behind him. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That soldier hangs a shingle at the very top of the cross. Printed on it in Hebrew and Greek and Latin, by order of Pilate himself, is the legend: Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews.
Now the troops responsible for these crucifixions settle on the ground and begin to divide the criminals' clothes among themselves. They cast lots for the various pieces. Rain falls steadily now, and the breeze is stiffening. Nevertheless, pilgrims still travel up the road and into the city. They see the inscription above him and grin. Certain Pharisees are standing by, nudging one another. He saved others, they laughed. What do you think? Can he save himself? Ha ha. Derision is common at crucifixions. It takes a man so long to die. Citizens participate. But Jesus' shoulders are pulling apart. He can scarcely hear human voices over the shrieking of his own pain. If you are the Son of God, prove it by setting yourself free. Hey, King, King of the Jews, jump down from that cross, and we will believe in you. The criminal hanging to his left is laughing. Messiah, Messiah. The man is gasping in genuine laughter. He now, I meet Messiah, been waiting all my life, been waiting since the days of Daniel. And look, he shows up dying. Well, Messiah, he hisses at Jesus, save yourself and save me too. How can you say that? The other criminal is not laughing. Don't you fear God? We are justly condemned, but this man has done nothing wrong, Jesus. Jesus, he whispers. Jesus, roused by the devotion and the utterance, lifts his head and looks. This man's tendons are cracking through his neck and shoulders. Jesus of Nazareth, you healed my mother of bleeding, the criminal whispers. Doctors nearly destroyed her. I hated them. I hated everyone in authority. but you said that her faith had saved her. Now I am touching you, Jesus, as she did, and I'm begging you to remember me when you come into your kingdom. Poor child, frightened of dying, casting his life to the one crucified beside him. Jesus struggles for breath and answers, truly today you will be with me in paradise. All at once the wind dies. Black clouds close like fists in heaven. Even the beasts are silent, and travelers hurry toward the city now. A storm is coming. Jesus drops his eyes, sees familiar women at his feet, and involuntarily cries out, "This is the sorrow. This is suffering greater than whips and spikes and a universe of derision." His mother is there, Mary, still supporting herself by gripping John's arm, is looking directly at him, pleading with him. Her face is at the level of his waist. She is crying. She's 50 years old, gray and frail, and her eyes are begging him, "Why? Why are you dying?" Jesus wants to howl his grief to the black skies. He cannot touch his mother anymore. He cannot receive her love anymore. Oh God, in his condition, he is not worthy of the love of anyone. Woman, 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 he murmurs to his mother. He rolls his head toward John. He is your son now. To John, Jesus whispers, "And she is your mother. Please take her away. Care for her." He shuts his eyes. He is occupied by elemental things, life and death. His body hangs heavily from the extended arms and the metal spikes at the ends of them. Whenever he moves, his bones make grinding sounds, and the pain descends into his pelvis, and he loses control of all his physical functions. He groans in human filthiness. Jesus opens his eyes again. His mother and John are gone.
The day is dark with a thick darkness. Thunder rumbles deep in heaven. There is a pause of eerie calm. Then lightning forks the belly of the clouds. The crash follows immediately, and all at once the wind is shrieking down the Jewish tombs. Trees bow and rise again, the leaves torn forward like woman's hair. The road to Jerusalem clears swiftly of people. The soldiers huddle on the lee side of the hill. It is noon, and now when the flashes of lightning themselves are extinguished, the earth is utterly black. Darkness an hour, while the fierce wind makes the rain sting like sand on the skin. And no one exists in all the world but Jesus and his wretched body. If he should call out, who would hear? The wind pulls and snaps his hair like a banner. All his wounds have tongues. They are screaming in pitches higher than hearing. Darkness another hour. Darkness coiled and thick, itself a power entoiling him. Binding his chest and his heart and his mind, Jesus can neither think nor breathe. He is sunk far, far down in the great engulfing flood of the dead. The deeps, the boil beneath creation. He has been swallowed by chaos. This is the place. It is here that he is dying. Darkness, the third hour. And now he knows obliteration. Jesus has been blotted out of the book of life. Not even God is here. Eli? No, not the God who has loved him from the beginning, whom he has loved. The one who he has called Abba. Eli? Eli? Where is his father now? Has the son become so foul that even God cannot look upon him? It is Jesus of Nazareth who howls out of hell. None but him. He can hear the words. They are his own words. He howls them up to heaven. My God, he shrieks. My God, why have you forsaken me? Silence. The universe is silenced by that cry. Jesus throws his body outward from the cross. His ribs splay apart in the straining. His shoulders form hollows at the pit of his neck. His mouth is an empty canyon. Someone says, "Why is he calling Elijah?" "I don't know," someone else says. "Wait and see." A third person is running through the darkness toward the crosses. Jesus allows his body to droop. The weight of it draws out his arms, closing the cage around his lungs, constricting his breathing. He can breathe only in faint pants, but he whispers, "I'm thirsty." "Yes, yes," cries a person who's been running around him. "Yes, drink this." On a long stalk, this most civil individual raises a sponge to Jesus' lips. He sucks and tastes a common wine. He drinks. Jesus has never drunk so sweet a drink in all his life before. The rain ended. The winds died. A little light shifts down like flour from the clouds. "It is finished," Jesus gasped. "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." His body falls far forward. His head sinks down between the wings of his rising arms. His heavy black hair, his long wet hair, falls over his head like a curtain. Everlasting. Sighs issued from his open mouth. And that is the end. He dies.
Called for the centurion named Longinus. He asked whether Jesus of Nazareth were truly dead already. "There's a fellow here who wants the body, a member of their Sanhedrin, Joseph. He wants to bury him in his own tomb." "You are sure, then, he is dead?" "My lord, we went to break the legs of the criminals to hasten their dying, but Jesus was already dead. A soldier proved it by piercing his side with a spear. The blood that flowed out was mingled with water." Pontius Pilate waved a fat hand in front of his face. "I will never understand this people. Never. Go tell that fellow Joseph he has my permission. He's waiting in the shadows of the gate. Go." Joseph of Arimathea and Longinus returned to Golgotha together.
Joseph, a man well groomed and richly dressed, knelt down on the earth and unrolled a linen cloth. It was an expansive piece, close woven and white. Then he leaned a ladder against the back of Jesus' cross. He took a rope and an iron claw and climbed up behind the body, which still hung from its arms, away from the pole. Joseph looped the rope around the chest of the dead. Then, pulling the ends back under his armpits and over the crossbeam, he tossed them down to Longinus. With sudden, violent wrenches of the claw, Joseph yanked the spike from Jesus' left wrist. The body swung out and hung from the right arm. Longinus tightened the rope, taking Jesus up somewhat. Joseph applied himself to the right spike. It whimpered in the wood, and Jesus slumped altogether forward into the loop of rope. Longinus felt the weight in both ends of the rope. "Hold him, sir," Joseph whispered. "Hold him." He scurried down the ladder and stood below the slouching corpse, under the black rain of the dead man's long hair. He put the claw to the spike through Jesus' ankles. Longinus heard that he was weeping when he pulled that spike. Even as Joseph spread his arms to catch the corpse, he glanced to the centurion and whispered, "Now." And Longinus paid the rope out, and Jesus came down into Joseph's arms, one at the bend of the knees and one around his shoulders. The head fell over Joseph's left arm. The mouth opened up under Joseph's close gazing, and Longinus saw a holy yearning in his eyes. Joseph of Arimathea was holding his whole treasure in all the world, this world and the next one too. He lay as Lord upon the white shroud. He wound the linen around him. And here came the women again. They knelt like flowers around Joseph's tender wrapping. They each touched the broad, bloodless forehead of the dead man before it, too, was covered with cloth. Then they watched as Joseph took the shoulders and Longinus took the feet, and together they bore the body to Joseph's tomb, carved in rock with other Jews. Joseph knelt down and back in. Longinus knelt and went forward. They lifted the body to a low edge cut in stone on the right. They came out again and rolled a wheel-sized stone down a groove that had been etched just outside the sepulchre until the heavy stone covered the door. So then it was done. Jesus of Nazareth was buried.